If you live to be 76 years old, you'll be alive for about 4,000 weeks. Out of those 4,000 weeks, depending on your age, here's about how many you've already lived. Some of us will live longer than 4,000 weeks, and some of us shorter. But either way, one of our primary goals as human beings is to make the most out of the time we have here on Earth. The problem we face is that in order to make the most of our time, we feel like we have to control it, which is impossible, at least according to Oliver Burkeman. In his book, 4,000 Weeks, Burkeman says that many of us are under the delusion that we can gain total control of our time, which he defines as the ability to complete all necessary tasks and projects in the time you've allocated to them, and the ability to decide exactly how to spend your time. He believes we're under this delusion for a few reasons. But one of the big ones is because the world we live in nowadays has something that Burkeman calls time-saving technology everywhere. For example, you can order a package and have it delivered just a few hours later. Like this thing. I ordered it earlier today and it came in just a few hours. And look, it can change colors. And you can communicate with somebody on the other side of the world in a matter of seconds. When we use these technologies, we develop the belief that since they're saving us time, that time that they save us should give us greater control over our schedule. When you do the math, it makes sense. The more time you save, the more time you have. So that should give you greater control over how you spend it. He also says that the increased efficiency of the technology we have at our disposal makes us feel like we should be able to get things done faster ourselves. But in 4,000 Weeks, Burkeman explains why these beliefs are wrong, and he argues that believing the delusion that we can gain total control over our time leads us down a road of unhappiness, frustration, and regret. But if we can accept the fact that we'll never have total control, and that we are actually limited in what we can accomplish within our lifetime, then we'll be happier and more fulfilled as a result. Now, I'm still deciding how I feel about Burkeman's take on all of this, so let's talk about it and you can decide for yourself. In the book, he says there are 3 reasons why we'll never be able to gain total control over our time. The first reason he gives is that we distract ourselves from important tasks. He says that freeing up time in our schedule doesn't give us more control because we tend to avoid the work that matters anyway. For example, let's say you have an important call to make and you've done all the necessary preparation, but you're nervous to actually dial the number. Even if we cleared everything else from your calendar, you'd probably still spend a significant amount of time doing more research, putting together more figures, and rehearsing the conversation in your head rather than simply making the call itself. Burkeman says we do this because it allows us to feel like we're making progress without actually having to risk failure. When you're preparing for that call, it's pretty much impossible to fail. But once you actually dial the number and you get somebody else on the line, you could be turned down at any minute. I agree with this idea for the most part, but I would say that a lot of the time it doesn't even go that deep. I find that when I do the little tasks that feel productive rather than focusing on the important stuff, it's usually just because the little tasks are simply easier. For example, there was less resistance to overcome when I rearranged my desk than there was to sit down and record this video. The reason for that wasn't because I was afraid of failing at recording this video. It was just because recording this video is harder than stacking books. Reasons number 2 and 3 why we'll never be able to gain total control over our time are that the more time we free up, the more tasks appear to occupy it, and the faster we work now, the faster we'll have to work in the future. Burkeman lists these as 2 separate reasons, but they essentially make the same point. The more time we have available, the more items will make their way onto our to-do lists, regardless of whether that's because we're eliminating tasks altogether or because we're finishing tasks more quickly. When I left my job about a year ago, I thought that I was going to sit back, relax, and enjoy my free time with absolutely nothing to do. But ironically, once I actually left, I started to feel like I was busier than before when I still had my job. I was running around all day and it felt like there was no shortage of things to do. But the reality is that those things that I was doing after I left my job were probably things that I wouldn't have been doing if I had still had my job, because I would have been too busy working. But because I had the time to do them, they seemed more important, and therefore they made their way onto my to-do list. This whole idea reminds me of something called Parkinson's Law, which basically says that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So for example, if you have a project to complete and you give yourself a deadline of 1 day, then it'll take you 1 day to complete that project. But if you give yourself a deadline of a week from now, then it'll take you 1 week to complete that same project. The idea is that if you have 24 hours to complete the project, then you'll do strictly what's necessary to complete it within that time frame. But if you give yourself 7 days to complete that same project, then the work that you have to do to complete the project will expand to meet the time available. If Burkeman were to come up with his own definition for this idea, I imagine he'd say something like, the amount of work to be done expands to fill your capacity to complete it. It's easy to get caught in this trap, and I feel like it's one of the reasons why people always feel like they're so busy. If you believe you can get everything done, then you'll probably feel inclined to fill any empty space on your calendar with something to do in both your personal and your professional life, and on both weekdays and weekends. Because this is pretty much the norm, and because being busier makes you feel more productive, you might think this inclination is harmless, or maybe even that it's good. But Berkman would disagree. And in the book, he lists 4 negative side effects of believing we can get everything done. The first side effect is that we beat ourselves up for being unproductive. A natural result of believing that we can get everything done is feeling guilty when we still have things left to do. And because there will always be something that we could be doing, we feel perpetually guilty, and we beat ourselves up for not using our time well. The second side effect is that we isolate ourselves in order to get more done. Berkman argues that the more we believe we can gain total control over our time, the more we start to view other people as interruptions to that goal. And so in order to avoid being interrupted, we spend less time with our friends and family. To be honest, I kind of have a hard time with this one. I think it's true that in order to get more done, we tend to spend less time with other people, and that there's definitely a balance to be created between socializing and working. But I also think that if you want to accomplish big goals and you want to achieve something out of the ordinary, then you're going to have to make proportionate sacrifices. And I think depending on what those sacrifices are, that they're not necessarily bad. For example, are you sacrificing nights out at the bar with your friends, or are you sacrificing holidays with your family? Obviously, well, hopefully those things are weighted differently, so the sacrifices they actually entail are also weighted differently. However, I'm also very aware of the fact that I'm looking at this from the perspective of a 25-year-old who sees the world completely differently than a 60-year-old who knows more about life and has a better perspective on the things that really matter. The third side effect of believing that we can get everything done is that we don't get to the most important tasks. Berkman says that when we believe we can get everything done, then we're more likely to fit things into our schedule and we're less likely to prioritize. And as a result, we spend more time on the trivial stuff and not enough time on the important stuff. The fourth and final side effect is that we focus on the future at the expense of the present. Because we believe that we can get on top of everything we need to do, we spend our time trying to achieve the impossible goal of crossing every item off of our to-do list. In other words, we spend our time in the present trying to save ourselves time in the future. In his book, Who Will Cry When You Die, Robin Sharma explains that letting enjoyable present moments slip by because you dedicate all your time to work and concerns about the future not only causes you to suffer, but also leaves you with regrets on your deathbed. So according to Berkman, those are the 4 side effects of believing that we can get everything done and that we can gain total control over our time. And before we dive into the solution that Berkman offers for all of the problems we've discussed so far, I want to introduce you guys to a platform called Shortform. After giving Shortform a try for about a month, I decided that they were going to be the first company I partnered with because they provide a real, genuine solution for a problem I've had for a long time. The list of nonfiction books that I want to read has been growing seemingly exponentially for the past few years now, but just like many of you, I have a full-time job and I have other obligations that always seem to take priority over sitting down and actually reading those books. And I've wanted some solution to be able to get the key concepts and main ideas from those books and extract some valuable lessons without actually having to sit down and read the whole thing. And until recently, I was resorting to videos similar to this one of people like Ali Abdaal reviewing books and extrapolating the main ideas and the main lessons for me. But when Shortform reached out and I gave their platform a try, I quickly realized that they were the exact solution that I had been looking for without even realizing it. They were a way to get the main ideas and the key lessons from books without having to rely on other people to extrapolate them for me. I don't have a very long attention span, so my favorite thing about Shortform is that their book guides are short enough that I can get through them in one sitting, but they're detailed enough that I can really understand the book's key concepts at a deep level. And to show you just how detailed their book guides are, I made this entire video based on Shortform's guide to 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. I genuinely love their platform, and I highly recommend it. And because I've partnered with them, you can get a 5-day free trial and 20% off an annual subscription if you use the link below, or you go to shortform.com/cc. Alright, now back to the video. Berkman's solution to our problem of feeling like we need to control our time and the delusion that we can get everything done is to accept our limits and to work within them. What this does not mean is that we can use the fact that we don't have enough time to get everything done as an excuse not to get anything done. Instead, we should recognize that although we may want to become an actor, a CEO, an astronaut, and a professional athlete, we just simply don't have enough time in our lives to become each of those things. And what happens when we operate under the belief that we do have enough time for all those things is we end up spreading ourselves so thin that we don't do any one of them well. And that's exactly the kind of thing that leads us down that road of unhappiness, frustration, and regret that I mentioned earlier. But when we accept that our life is finite, and therefore what we might be able to accomplish in our lifetime is limited, we free ourselves from the burden of thinking that we need to meet these unrealistic expectations that we've set for ourselves, or maybe that somebody else has set for us. Berkman offers 10 tactics. I don't know what this is. Berkman offers 10 tactics. Some people will get that reference.
I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
Anyway, Berkman offers 10 tactics to help us accept our limitations. And this is really where the rubber meets the road, and we learn how to implement the lessons from the book into our own lives. So I'm going to cover the 3 that I think are the most important in detail, rather than scratching the surface on all 10. Tactic number 1 is commit to your life choices. This idea is all about choosing to do something in life and going all in on that thing. Berkman talks about how a lot of times we're afraid to commit fully to one thing because something better might come around if we were to keep our options open. And that's true. There's always the possibility that something marginally better will pop up if you just sit back and wait for the right opportunity. But that's precisely the problem. If you sit back and wait long enough, one day you'll realize that you've spent your whole life looking for the best opportunity, something that will maximize your happiness and fulfillment. But as a result, you've passed up on countless other opportunities that would have made you plenty happy. And because you never made a decision, you haven't made meaningful progress on anything. Barry Schwartz writes about maximizers versus satisficers in his book, The Paradox of Choice. Maximizers, as you can imagine, are people who try to maximize every decision they make. They spend hours researching and weighing pros and cons before they come to a conclusion. But once they make their decision, they can't help but wonder if there might be something better out there. So despite all of the time and energy they spent trying to make the right choice, they ultimately find themselves unsatisfied. Satisficers, on the other hand, recognize that there will always be something better out there. So rather than making their decisions based on whether or not something is the best, they make their decisions based on whether or not something meets their standards. They understand that their time is better spent enjoying the decision that they've made than it is trying to chase after something that might make them a little bit happier. Because the truth is that chase will be never ending, and it will cost them the enjoyment that they could have had if they had committed to one decision in the beginning. Research has found that we have something called a happiness protecting response. Yes, you heard that right. And this kicks in when we no longer have the ability to change our circumstances. So basically, once we commit to something, even if we're not ecstatic about it in the beginning, our brains will find reasons to be happy about it because we no longer have any other options. So using our previous example, if you decide to become either an actor, a CEO, an astronaut, or a professional athlete, rather than leaving the option open to become all 4, you'll be happier in the long run because your happiness protecting response will kick in once you no longer have the option of becoming the other 3 things, and it'll be happy that you've chosen just the one. Tactic number 2 is to make time for critical tasks now. Berkman says that we need to make time for the most important stuff in our lives right now rather than waiting for time to open up for them, because like we discussed earlier, when that time does open up, it will likely just be filled with other tasks that need to be done. And if we want to be able to make time for critical tasks right now, we have to come to terms with the fact that because our life is finite, there will always be an opportunity cost for our choices. In other words, when we decide to do one thing, we are also deciding not to do something else. And because that's the case, we should choose to do the important things and accept that we probably won't get around to the other stuff that still matters to us, but is ultimately less significant. In his book, The 5 a.m. Club, Robin Sharma suggests that, surprise, surprise, one way to do this is to wake up at 5 a.m. in order to take care of things like exercising and personal reflection. Unlike Berkman, however, Sharma argues that there's no opportunity cost to this because you wouldn't be doing anything other than sleeping at 5 a.m. anyways. But I'd argue that there still is an opportunity cost because in order to wake up at 5 a.m. that probably means you have to go to bed sooner, which might mean that you're sleeping at 10 p.m. when normally you'd be up reading a book, which is something you really enjoy. And that's the definition of an opportunity cost, but who am I to make that call? Tactic number 3 is to limit your in-progress projects. Limit your in-progress project. Limit the number of projects you're working on at one time. This is similar to the idea of committing to doing one thing, but it's more specific because it says that even within that one thing that you've already committed to doing, there are multiple different things that you could be working on all at once. But when you limit the number of projects you work on at once, you rid yourself of overwhelm, and you really lean into the fact that it's possible that you may not get all of your work done. In order to implement this tactic, Berkman says that you can only take on new projects after you've completed old ones, and he recognizes that this will probably be difficult, because it'll likely require you to say no to requests from friends or coworkers. Saying no is a big enough topic in itself that I'm going to be making a video about it here shortly. So depending on when you watch this video, I might have already published it, and if so, I'll link it right up here. But for the purpose of this video, one way to make saying no a little bit easier is an idea from Greg McEwen, which is to consider the opportunity cost of saying yes. We've already covered opportunity costs, but in this context, you can ask yourself something like, what will I have to give up in order to say yes to this request? The answer might be the quality of your work, time with your family, or a trip to the gym. But when you consider the cost of what someone's asking you to do, you might find it easier to say no, because you realize that you're not willing to pay the price that's required to say yes. I'll put the other 7 tactics that Berkman offers to help us accept our limitations up on the screen, and you can pause the video if you want to read those. Overall, I think Berkman's idea of accepting our time limitations is important, and if done correctly, implementing his lessons into your own life is a good way to avoid a lot of potential unhappiness, frustration, and regret. One thing I was surprised that Berkman didn't cover, which I think is an absolutely essential part of accepting that you'll never have total control over your time, is that even more important than realizing that you might not be able to fit everything into your schedule is realizing that you might not be able to fit everyone into your schedule. It's one thing to accept that you might have to eliminate work or that you might have to choose one career path over another, but it's another thing entirely to come to terms with the fact that your time limitations also apply to your personal relationships. And if that sounds important to you, then you might want to check out this video right here about how to deal with losing friends on your journey to becoming the person that you want to be. Don't forget to get your free trial of Shortform at the link down below. Thanks for watching, live your life to the fullest, and I'll see you in the next video.